the Sandstone City. Elaine in conversation with Prajwal, and there's a launch by Namita Gokhale. 8-year-old Michael Doherty lies in an open coffin, listening to those who have come to pay their respects. His dead son, Carmack's protests. He is not yet ready to pass over. The reason is his granddaughter. 20-something Sarah has inexplicably abandoned her plans to settle in Spain and returned home deeply scarred by the Sandstone City. And he needs to know why. He is granted a special grace period of 40 days. 40 days to discover and heal his granddaughter's trauma. 40 days to face his own past. 40 days to find peace before he must make his final departure. But Michael and Sarah are not alone. Ghosts populate the streets of Salamanca, and they have a message for Sarah. Set between the modern-day Belfast and the Spanish Civil War, the Sandstone City is a story about the decisions we make, the choices denied to us, and how we navigate what's left. Elaine, I would warmly welcome Elaine Canning and Prajwal Parajuly over to the stage. Please. Can we have a big round of applause for both of them? Thank you. Elaine Canning is a writer, editor, and a public engagement specialist. She is currently head of special projects at Swansea University, Wales, which includes the Davies National Short Story Competition and the International Dylan Thomas Prize. The Sandstone City, set partly in contemporary Belfast, is Canning's debut novel. Prajwal Parajuly is the author of The Gurkha's Daughter, Stories and Land Where I Flee. His works have been shortlisted for Dylan Thomas Prize and the Mogford Prize in the UK, the Emile Guimet Prize and the first Nobel Prize in France, and longlisted for the Story Prize in the US. He lives in Paris and teaches at Sciences Po. Namita Gokhale, I would request her for the book launch, is the author of 21 books, including 11 works of fiction, and editor of numerous anthologies. Her acclaimed debut novel, Paro, Dreams of Passion, was published in 1984. Recent works of fiction, including The Blind Matriarch, Jaipur Journals, and Betrayed by Hope. She's also the co-founder and co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival, ladies and gentlemen. She has been recognized both for her writing and her commitment to the multilingual Indian literature and cross-cultural literary dialogues. She was the Sahitya Akademi, National Academy of Letters awardee for 2021 and received the prestigious First Centenary National Award for Literature in 2017. She has recently been honored with Niliamarani Sahitya Samman in 2023. I would request Namita here to launch the book, Elaine's first book. Yes, please. Big round of applause for all three of them, especially Elaine Canning, whose book is being unveiled today. I'm inviting Namita for her couple of words. Thank you.
Hello, friends. It is wonderful to have two friends on stage, Elaine Canning and Prajwal, both accomplished writers, but also very, very dear friends. And I had made out a speech which I was going to read out to you about the book, which I enormously enjoyed, but it's somewhere not with me. So I'd like to tell you the little narrative about when I first met Elaine. It was in Wales when I was on the jury of the Dylan Thomas Prize. And that is when, in the railway station, awaiting the train, she mentioned to me that she was working on a novel which was set in Spain. And it's wonderful always to go back in memory and remember when the author was talking about the book and when the book was a thought or a glimmer in their eyes. And then over the years to see it come out, we are honored, we are overjoyed to have her here with us at the Jaipur Literature Festival. It is a book where the story is a very universal one. It is of loss and of realizing that death is not the end. Our loved ones live on within us and at so many planes around us. I was very, very moved by the story. It takes audacity and belief and faith to write the sort of story she has written, and it will have a universal appeal because all of us have gone through that. And the opening scene, when you see that the grandfather is thinking about those he will inevitably leave behind, but he gets that 40 days of grace. It's a beautiful story, so congratulations, Elaine. Thank you, Prajwal, for being here with us, and give a big round of applause for Elaine.
Thank you, Namita, for your generosity. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Elaine. In September of last year, a book landed in my inbox. It had everything I desire in a novel: complicated family dynamics, cross-generational bonds that get tested, familial guilt and obligations, and some spooky otherworldly elements. In this book, the dead follow their children and grandchildren from beyond their grave. And you have a pretty special book that's stylistically, thematically dexterous, and also extremely enjoyable. Elaine, it's a pleasure to be doing this with you. Thank you for coming again. Let's start from the beginning. How did the book happen?
Thank you so much, Prajwal. It's an absolute honor to be here launching the book with you and Namita. And thank you so much for such a warm introduction as well. So in terms of where the book came from, there are a number of different strands to this book. So I should maybe start with the city of the title, the Sandstone City. The Sandstone City is a reimagining of a city in northwest Spain called Salamanca. And I was very, very lucky to spend 15 months there as a student studying Spanish. And I absolutely fell in love with that city. There was something really magical about it. And it has stayed with me. So that was the first strand. And the second strand was I was really interested. I've always been really interested in identity and past and present versions of ourselves. And I wanted to write a book which would bring together my upbringing in Ireland, in some way, a working class environment in Ireland, and somehow melding that with this city in Spain, Salamanca, that I fell in love with. And I wanted to do that through looking at family dynamics, looking at love, and looking at the way in which we self-identify and the sorts of things that we do to protect ourselves sometimes, the things that we conceal in order to self-protect.
Thank you, Elaine. I would love for the audience here to get a taste of your book. Do you mind reading a short extract?
I'd love to.
I actually, if I have your permission, I want to read the first sentence of the book.
Of course, go ahead.
Okay, this is one of the most intriguing first sentences of a book ever written. I am lying in the box, waiting for them to open the lid.
I know full well they positioned me next to the bay window of our cramped front room. My Annie will have given the orders, though she'll say they come from a higher place. Never met a woman like her for her faith. This isn't a space I normally inhabit, nor is the box, of course. Annie always kept me away from the window. She said it was for the best, for prying eyes only give rise to tittle-tattle. I never understood whose eyes she was talking about, whether she was more concerned about me seeing or being seen, but I knew better than to question her. God knows I knew better. I also knew better than to ask what she was doing, hanging about in front of the window when it took her fancy, all those times over the years. From my chair by the hearth, I could always see out into the street, painted black with marching mourners, or blazoned white with the day's bride, or snuffed grey with bonfires, or someone's burnt-out vehicle. It never mattered whether her slender frame was in the way or not. Sometimes it was better that my Annie didn't know everything. Today's a special day, however. Today, in death, it's imperative that I'm on display. I'm so thankful that my eldest daughter, Chrissy, was the one who picked up my clothes, and it wasn't left to the other two. Mary and Catherine, not an ounce of sense between them. I know I'll be in my best grey suit, the one McGinty knocked up for me a few years back. Knocked up. Jesus, what a term. Almost enough to make this stiff, useless body recoil. Implies some desperate botch job, the kind I used to fall for, especially when it came to the house or business. Always when I was trying to give some lad a turn. But McGinty knew people, proper tailors like. I'll keep you straight, Michael. Don't you worry yourself, he'd say. I've always been fond of a good suit, certainly since my 20s. I'm sure it comes from my days in the war. 9 months of being forced to wear a filthy, louse-ridden, ill-fitting uniform is more than enough to make you crave a well-cut jacket and decent pair of trousers. My daughters always said I had some sort of compulsive disorder, sitting about the house, all dressed up with nowhere to go. Now that sounds strange, talking about the girls in the past tense. I feel different. Pain-free, thank God, in the physical sense, though not so sure about responsibility-free. Does responsibility ever leave any of us? And this old heart of mine, its beat might have ground to a halt, but there's still plenty of love in it if I'm given half a chance to share it.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was beautiful, and I hope it gives readers a chance for you to fall in love with the book the way I did. You know, Elaine, the Sandstone City is peopled with some pretty interesting characters. You have Sarah, you have Tank, but you've mentioned in many interviews that it's Michael, this 88-year-old man who is lying in his coffin, is that one character that you've not been able to let go of, who has haunted you. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so Michael is a very interesting one because, as you've heard, the book opens with Michael lying in a coffin. And the story that I wanted to write was always Michael's backstory. So it was about his time in Spain, his time in the war there. But it was always meant to be a backdrop to a journey that his granddaughter Sarah went on in the course of the book. But as I began writing it, I found that his voice was just there. His voice was niggling away at me the entire time. He just wouldn't leave me alone. So he was in here talking and talking and talking and talking to me. And it was only whenever I allowed him space on the page and began to write his voice that the novel then began to take shape.
Okay. And let's talk about the otherworldly elements in the book. This is an extremely difficult thing to do, and one that you do with such finesse. How does one choose to write a book where the most important character is actually dead and comes back as a ghost?
I know. Well, like Michael, I never meant for this book to be populated with ghosts or otherworldly characters, perhaps is a way to describe them. But what I find in the writing of the book is once Michael had a presence there, I wanted to be able to create some sort of distance between him and his granddaughter Sarah, in the sense that I didn't want her to feel the weight of responsibility of having to respond potentially to any challenges or decisions, anything related directly to her grandfather. And so by creating otherworldly characters who she interacts with in the Sandstone City was a way for me to be able to give her her own autonomy in many ways, at a time, a very difficult time for her when she's dealing with the grief of her grandfather, who was so special to her.
All right. You spoke a bit about challenges. You have been an academic all your adult life. You have authored several academic journals. How different was attempting a novel after all the writing that you'd done before?
So different, a very different process. I find a freedom in writing this novel that I never had when I was writing academic papers. And I think also my approach was very different because as an academic, I find that you map things out, you structure things before really you put a word on the page. You do the research, you work out your structure and your format. Whereas one of the things I absolutely loved about this novel was having that freedom to be able to be playful, to be able to challenge myself to write a character like Michael, to be able to challenge myself to write otherworldly characters. There are three others in the book, Charlie, Jose, and Anna. And it was just a joy. It was joy, it was playful, and a very, very different process. And for the first time, I was able to allow myself in a novel to be able to develop my ideas and let things come as they did in the writing itself, rather than mapping everything out from the get-go.
I'm sure there are a few writers in the audience who are extremely curious about what your writing process is like. Do you follow a ritual? When do you write?
So I normally write really early in the morning. I find that that's my time before the rest of the world wakes up. I don't have to be mum. I don't have to think about my day job. I can just write, and I can just be in that imaginary world of my own. I find that if I don't do that first thing in the morning, it's really difficult for me to start at another time in the day. So if I've got my little hour in the morning, then I will write at other times of the day. But I'm sure, like many writers here as well, you have so many other things going on that you grasp that time, that really precious time when you can. So I will scribble notes at the side of a tennis court or waiting outside an after-school club. I'll just grab those moments whenever I can. I write in notebooks, I'll make notes on my phone, I do a variety of different things.
Do you write every day?
I try and write every day.
Okay.
I try very hard to write every day, but if I don't get my early morning slot, then I don't get anything done that day.
Okay. See, ladies and gentlemen and non-binary people, this is a book that oscillates between Belfast and Salamanca. You grew up in Belfast. You never really went back, although you were expected to.
I wasn't expected to go back, but I left Belfast, 20 years ago now, as a very young academic who had been offered a first job in a university called Bangor in the north of Wales, in the United Kingdom. And they offered me a lovely job, to set up the Spanish department there. I had a 3-year contract, and I thought, okay, well, I'll go for 3 years and I'll come back home again. And then sometimes, you know, your life takes you in directions that you don't anticipate. I moved to South Wales, to Swansea University, and that's where I still am. But home for me is always Belfast. Despite having lived in Wales for so long, home for me is always Belfast, and I go back there as often as I can.
All right, and what also fascinated me about this book was I knew nothing about the Irish involvement in the Spanish War. Was this something you grew up with? Was it something you talked about at the dinner table at home? Tell us more about that.
So it was something that I became aware of when I began studying Spanish at the age of 14. And as part of learning the language, we learned a little bit about the culture, a little bit about the history, a little bit about the literature and so on. And then as I developed my studies in Spanish, I went on to do A-level, I studied at university, I learned a little bit more about the war. But what was really interesting was I knew about the Irish involvement in the Spanish Civil War from the perspective of the Irishmen who volunteered as part of the international brigades on the Republican side, but I was not aware at all of the Irishmen who went to fight on the nationalist side, because it was viewed in Ireland at that time that religion was so important. It was seen as a holy war, as a religious crusade of Christianity versus communism, and so it was something that it absolutely intrigued me, and the idea that you could have men going from Ireland to fight on both sides of the war.
Thank you for that, Elaine. So I've read the book a few times. I first read it in September. I read it this morning. I marvel at how lyrically dexterous you are. I love your very understated prose that almost looks a bit effortless, if I can say that. I also love that your dialogue crackles. What do you think your strengths and weaknesses as a writer are? When I have to do descriptive writing, I clam up. I cannot describe a mountain in more than 3 words, in more than 3 sentences. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think the very interesting thing with this book is that I'd written a lot of short stories before this, and my starting point was always character. Character and voice are very, very important to me as a writer. And of course, with this book, the 2 strands that I had to start with were the city I mentioned, so the place, and also the historical context, which is, it is, of course, an important part of the book, but the book also moves around other moments of history, particularly in Belfast. Whenever I approached this book, I didn't have the character that I needed. And so it took a little while for Michael to come to me. So I think for me, it's about getting the voice right, and I guess that also means that dialogue is so important in my work. Those lengthy passages when you're talking about mountains or describing, you know, a sandy beach can be quite tough. Okay. But I'm much more comfortable when I'm writing dialogue.
Okay, all right. It shows. It definitely shows. But I also think that your descriptors are lovely. Your descriptions are lovely. And sandy beach or not, I mean, it's difficult to describe a sandy beach in many words anyway. You've spoken about character. You've spoken about voice. I have also been very curious about the themes in your book. There's grief, there's loss, there's this encompassing duality of resurrection. Could we talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So grief is one of the core themes of the book, but I think and I hope that within it I've balanced that out with love, and there are 2 love stories in here. Other love stories which, without saying, which I given too much away, other love stories which don't quite come to fruition. And the theme of love, the love stories that are there, plus family love and the love across generations of the same family, were very important to me in terms of balancing those with grief. So the book has a dual narrative. Michael is a first-person narrator, and we also have his granddaughter Sarah and her journey and her story, which is written in the third person. And it's about how those two, without actually having any contact with each other, how those 2 characters are able to interact, how Sarah deals with her grief, how they are able to express their love for each other, the memories that both of them carry about the love for each other and the love for other members of the family. And as I said at the beginning, I've been fascinated by past and present versions of the self. And identity is a really important theme for me in this book. This idea of the fractured self, and sometimes the decisions that we have to make, decisions we wouldn't necessarily choose, but circumstances really dictate those to us. And the ways then in which we have to reshape ourselves, carve out our future, and be able to manage those things that we can't share with others.
Thank you, Elaine. You spoke a bit about how you'd written a lot of academic stuff before, and this was the first novel that you attempted, but you had written short stories before this. How different was writing short stories versus writing a novel? And why did you choose for this book to be a novel as opposed to, say, a short story?
The content of this book, I felt, was I had a lot to say, and I had a lot of characters to cover, and I had a lot of ground to cover in this book, and I didn't think a short story would do it justice at all. The process is quite different. The way in which I think with a short story, you've got to dive right in, and you've got to, every word counts. So, you're within a limited word count, and you've got to make sure that every word counts, and you need to know also when to stop. Whereas with a novel, I think you've got a little bit more freedom, especially in the first drafts. Before you begin to really edit down, you've got a little bit more freedom to be able to consider different themes, different scenarios, different sort of plots and sub-themes, and you've got that ability to be able to be a little bit more expansive, be a little bit more playful.
Do you find one form more challenging than the other?
I think they're both challenging in very different ways. I think short stories are pretty challenging, though, because you're within that limited word count. And as I said, I think it's about knowing exactly when you come in and when you get out of that story.
I see a lot of young people in the audience, and I know young people these days are not very big fans of editing their works. How different was the first draft of your book from the final draft? What was the editing process like? How did you work with your editor from the beginning to the end? Tell us about that.
So I think my experience is a little bit unusual, perhaps, in that I began researching for this book back in 2019, and I went back to Salamanca. I took my young son with me. He had never been there before, and I wanted to give him a chance to experience something of the city and that magic that was, so deep within me. So I began the research then, and then of course COVID came. So I was very lucky that I got there in 2019. And the book itself, I began to write, very small drafts of various chapters. I began to write pieces of dialogue. I began to shape the characters and their voices. But I actually wrote the book in 9 months. So I wrote whenever I actually wrote the draft, the full first draft, I wrote that in about 7-8 months, and then I had about a month of editing before it went to my publisher. And then we worked through it together. It was absolutely brilliant. I have the most brilliant editor and publisher, and we worked through it together. But yeah, I think because I'd spent a long time thinking about it and researching it, that the writing process for me actually was much quicker than I anticipated.
Oh, wow. I write fast, edit slow. My first draft, I just vomit words on the page. That's not how it is for you? Do you have a very strong internal editor?
Yeah, I think I do. You know, I talked about being playful and with the characters and so on. But yes, I mean, I was playful in different ways. So that was, you know, scribbling down notes, formulating things in my head and so on. So yeah, when I got down to the writing, I know we're not meant to do this, but I do edit a lot as I go along. Okay. So that by the time I got to the end of that first draft, it was pretty much there.
Wow, I'm envious. The last question, what's next for Elaine Canning?
So I've got a couple of other projects I'm working on. I've got a book on the writer Maggie O'Farrell, which is coming out next year with Bloomsbury. I'm working on a short story collection. I'm finalising that at the moment. And that's a collection which is about the ways in which we communicate. I'm working under the theme, actually, of miscommunication, incommunicado, that whole idea of more unconventional ways, let's say, less traditional ways in which we might communicate. So I'm finalising that at the moment. And I've got the very first seeds of another novel. But it's very, very early days in that respect.
Wonderful, Elaine. We will now open the floor for questions. A volunteer with a mic will walk to you if you raise your hand. We have about 10 minutes for a few questions. I see a hand. There's the lady in blue. Yeah, could she have a mic, please?
Hello, I want to ask that how can we get the motivation to become an author?
How do you motivate, how can she get motivated to become an author? Or what is your motivation behind being an author?
Do you write at the moment?
Actually, I read at the moment to get a better experience.
That is just the best starting point, because I have some writer friends. When I was starting out, several writer friends of mine who I really, really admire told me that in order to be a successful writer, you've got to be an absolutely brilliant reader, and to read across all genres, different kinds of books. That was the best piece of advice I was given in terms of starting off to write. And the second thing I would say that is that if you write in your diary, if you're writing essays of any kind, anything that you write, if you're writing, you're a writer. And it's about having that confidence to know that it's something that you can do and something that you're passionate about. And if you're passionate about it, you will do it. You absolutely will do it. But thank you for the question. It's a lovely question. And good luck with your writing.
Follow-up question. Do you have one more question? Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Best of luck with your writing.
The lady in blue. Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask about patience in writing. I'm a poet, so like I write the first draft, I like word vomit, and then I'll spend 10-20 hours editing it or whatever. But I mean, I guess that's the same case with short stories as well. Like you kind of write it all in one go, and then you can spend as many hours editing it. But with novels, isn't like, you know, as somebody who was writing short stories primarily, how did you find the experience of writing a novel which took you 7-8 months of writing and not editing?
That's a great question, thank you. I think you're absolutely right about patience. You've got to have a lot of patience as a writer, I think. Would you agree, Prajwal?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So patience is absolutely key. But it's a really great question about moving from short story to novel, because, and it perhaps explains why I ended up having to write the novel quite quickly when I was at that very, when I was ready to do it. Because when I first began scribbling little notes and things, I was getting a little bit frustrated because I had to slow down. Whereas when I'm writing short stories, I feel like there's a momentum. There's it's almost like a little internal thing with me that tells me I have to go. There's a momentum that needs to be sustained. Whereas with the novel, and the writer friends were saying to me, you just need to step back, take 10 seconds and breathe. And that was very difficult to do coming from the short story. And I did need a lot of patience to do that. So patience is key. And also, I think just if you can afford to have time every day to write, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, I think that's it. It's the continuity of it and taking little breaks from it. And I also find that a lot of the ideas that I have they reshape and they kind of find their final form in the course of the day when I'm doing other things. If I have that little writing slot at the beginning of the day, then the ideas follow me throughout the day. And by the end of the day, sometimes a little knot I had in the writing figures itself out. But yeah, patience and taking a little step back and allowing yourself time on the page to be able to open things out, to allow your characters to contemplate a little bit more, to try something new and so on, I think is what I would say.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the question. Yes, there's someone in white in the front. Yeah.
Hi, you mentioned at the beginning that you're interested in kind of past versions. Can you hear? That you're interested in past versions of ourselves. I also find that a really interesting kind of concept. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that and what it means to you. Sure,
thank you for the question. In the context of this novel, without giving too much away, I have a number of characters who have found themselves in particular circumstances in which, as I said, decisions are taken out of their hands, and then what they have to do is find a way to be able to propel themselves forward, to be able to find a way to reinvent themselves both in a different cultural context and within a different environment. And the reason that I think that I'm so interested in that is because I think that we all go through different periods in our lives where things don't quite work out as we would like to, or suddenly an opportunity actually arises, a very positive opportunity arises, whether that is in terms of a work opportunity, or it could be anything, or trying something new or taking up a new hobby. Something happens that was very unexpected, and you might have to make a decision about where you go with that, and that might mean you having to sacrifice something else or give something else up to make room for that thing. And I find that, I guess I find that throughout my life, talking about when I moved from Belfast to Wales, I never meant to stay in Wales. I love Wales. I never meant to stay there. It was absolutely fascinating journey from me, moving from Belfast to North Wales to South Wales. But in doing that, sometimes you do have to think, okay, well, this is the next step and I've got to leave something else behind at this point. And I think that's where the itch, I guess, to be able to explore that in this novel came from.
I know there are a lot of questions. How about the masked girl in the front? She's right next to you. Yeah.
I want to ask that what's the way how you observe things happening around you?
how do I observe things happening around me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think writers do become very good observers of both your context, the place that you're in, but also the people around you. So I would say that if you are interested in writing, it's a really good idea to carry a little notebook with you, or your phone if that's your preference. You can make notes in it, and to really look at the unexpected or the little sort of quirks around you. So perhaps it might be a thing which is out of place. It might be a thing you didn't expect to encounter in that particular location. It might be a snippet of conversation you overhear at the bus stop. All of those things are really important, because I do believe that, we didn't talk about it in very much detail at all. We mentioned the otherworldly characters in the book, but there is a magical realist strand in the book, which is really shapes the story and shapes the way the characters work in the story. And I do think that there is the magical around us. There is the magical in our day-to-day. And because we all perceive things differently, and we respond to things differently, something that I might find really special and magical might not appear that way to someone else, and vice versa. And so I think that we, as writers, I think it is about allowing yourself to be open to those sorts of things and looking out for the differences around you and the magic around you.
Great.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Elaine. That was so lovely.
You
Yeah?
came in my school.
Sorry?
Yesterday you came in my school.
Oh, yes, I was in your school yesterday, and you were all brilliant.
Ma'am, I was the last one to take your autograph.
You were amazing. Oh, can I talk about yesterday? I had the most incredible day yesterday. I went to 2 schools, and I met pupils who are like yourself, who are the most brilliant writers. I was so inspired to be in a room with so many talented people. And the really lovely gift that I have, everyone's going to be very jealous now, I've got, teachers are sending me or photographing all of the brilliant stories that were written yesterday, and they'll all be sent to me so that I can read them and I can send back comments on the story. So thank you so much for yesterday. It was absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
We may have time for one or maybe 2 questions. The gentleman in the back. Yeah.
Do places or environment around us really matter while writing? Like sitting in garden or at the bank of the river while writing your book or creating something? Like places really matter while writing something?
Yeah, I think places is important when you're writing. I think there are some writers who will write, who have a dedicated desk and will write at their desk, and that works for them. There are other writers, I know, and Prajwal might want to say a little bit about this, other writers for whom it's really important to write in different places and to move around, to be outside writing as well, to be in the garden or to be at the beach if that's possible, to be in different locations, different cities, I think is really important in terms of, for me certainly, I do have a little desk. That's where I am early morning. I'm not out. I'm not outside on my own. I'm at my little desk. But yeah, I do write in. I write in all sorts of places. As I said, I'm even writing at the side of a tennis court sometimes. So, but Prajwal's experience may be different from mine.
Well, I write in bed. I find it extremely comfortable. And see, what works for Elaine, what works for me may not work for you. You may be perfectly at home in a coffee shop. The bustle around you might actually inspire you. I find that extremely distracting. I could write in a coffee shop, but I could edit in a coffee shop, but not write there.
Me too.
Okay.
Me too.
All right. Good question.
Thank you.
We have time for one last question. The The lady in red or the lady in blue, one or the other, or both, yeah.
Okay, thank you. As writers, we do have ourselves, our past life, past experiences, the travel, everything peeping in our writing. How far do you feel that it should go, on in our writing?
You got that, yeah.
So writing, how far we should have past versions of ourselves in our writing.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I think that even when we don't feel we're writing about ourselves, we always bring, I think writers always bring something of themselves to the page. And I think that's why when we get to publication, it is quite a vulnerable thing, isn't it? It's putting a part of you out into the world. And so I think that sometimes subconsciously things from your past are feeding into your stories, even if you don't necessarily mean them to. So whatever we're writing, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, I do think that there's always a part of us in there.
Lovely. Your questions were brilliant. We do not have any more time, unfortunately, but Elaine will be available to sign copies of this incredible book in the tent there. So come over, ask her questions, grill her even more, and do read this great book. You will be the richer for it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. The incomparable Elaine Canning.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. We would like to thank you, Elaine Canning and Prajwal Parajuly.